Give me liberty and give me Annette.
I'm Annette Bybee. This is Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness. America, we have a problem. We have several, but I want to talk about a really big one today. Even as I sit here, about an hour ago, Joe Biden was named president, or at least the major news outlets were calling him as president. They're calling the election, let's put it that way. And that's not even the big problem. I mean, it is a problem, yes, but that's not the main problem. That is the reason, or that is the effect of the problem. Biden being named president on a Saturday, today is Saturday the 8th, after Election Day, which was Tuesday the 3rd. We have gone almost an entire week without having a president named. Okay, and a lot of that has to do with the really lame voter practices that we have in several states. And these states really need to get it together, and let's just hope they do it in the next 2 years. But that's not really the problem, because we also have a Senate which now is going to literally be decided on a special election in Georgia, because we are that divided. We do not know what the majority party is going to be in the Senate yet. And in the House, we are pretty close. We have a Democrat majority, but it's still going to be not terribly far apart. I don't know what the split is. There's maybe 13 or 15 more Democrats than Republicans, which is not a huge number considering how many members there are in the House. No, the problem is mainly that we have a country that is 50-50. And it's not even so much that they're 50-50, but that there is a pretty big gulf between the two sides. And the gulf may have been made apparent not just by this election, but by COVID-19. Yes, I am talking to you from the year 2020, which I naively at the beginning of the year thought was going to be a fabulous year because it was 2020. Not so much. Anyway, what's been going on that has brought this division to the fore is in large part the reaction to COVID. And this is interesting because there was actually a poll done and it showed that Democrats are more afraid of the virus than Republicans. And what I'm seeing on social media and in personal interactions is that Democrats, for the most part, are okay or pro-masks, pro-lockdowns, pro-social distancing, all that. They are okay with the government telling us what to do for the greater good, just to save one life or whatever. On the other hand, you've got Republicans and libertarians who are not okay with being told to wear masks, who see that as a violation of their civil liberties, who want to think for themselves and can read articles that say that masks are not doing the job, that lockdowns aren't working. And so you have this side of the country saying, no, we don't want that. So what we have is the potential for a civil war. Maybe not the same magnitude as our other civil war, but there's certainly some type of civil war in the making here, potentially. And there's already been lots of rioting in the streets this year, mostly from far left activists like Antifa and BLM. But there's threats of more of that. And I've been saying for a while now that it doesn't seem to matter who was going to be in office. We have people that are going to take to the streets. So there's a possibility of violence. So we have this problem, and I recently read this article by Hannah Cox on FEE, which is something about free enterprise. It's fee.com or org. It's a great website. I highly recommend it. But she talks about how we have such a huge divide that that's not really surprising, because we have basically a very diverse country. And she says we are really 50 micro countries that have chosen to coexist as one. It even says as much in our name, the United States. Unlike some other countries, we don't all share a common history, religion, ethnicity, accent, or culture. Oh, and her article is called "There's Only One Way to Stop Polarization from Tearing America Apart." So I read this article the other day, and I agreed with her conclusions. And she makes the point that it's actually surprising that we've gotten along as long as we have, and that it's a big country, we're super diverse, but that the reason we have gotten along as well as we have this long is because our founders set up this lovely thing called a constitution. If you do not have a constitution in the year 2020, you must have one. Go online, print a digital copy out if you want. If you really can't find a way to get one, I'll send you one. Email me at annette@annettetalks.com. I'll throw one of these little guys in an envelope for you. You've got to have one. Anyway, the founders set something up called federalism, which means that the government is split into different levels. And I want to show you what I used to do when I was teaching American government. I had this chart that I would make on the chalkboard. If you're not watching, you might want to check me out on YouTube just for fun. But the way it is set up is that each level of government is like this, like a layer cake. The layers not commingling. You have the federal government at the top, county, state in the center, and then maybe the city at the bottom with its little ordinances, right? And they're not supposed to commingle. It's a layer cake. Each layer does its own thing. But over the last 100 or so years, what we've had happen is the federal government expanding and reaching down into every layer of our lives, right down to monitoring and regulating almost everything we do. And so it's turned from a layer cake into a marble cake. You know, where when you make a marble cake and you take your knife and you spin it, you take the like chocolate and you mix it into the vanilla. Well, it's not supposed to. You're not supposed to mix. You should have chocolate. Now I'm going to put chocolate at the bottom because that's my favorite. And that's the closer government is to you, the better. So I'm going to put chocolate down here, and then maybe I'll put dark chocolate on the bottom and then medium chocolate in the middle, and then maybe mint at top because I hate mint. Anyway, so federalism means that you have different layers of government, and they're not supposed to reach into each other's jurisdiction. And in the United States, it was set up so that the federal government, or the top layer, is the smallest, right? It's got what we call enumerated powers, all right? And I don't know how many people are aware of this. It doesn't seem like very many are, but the first 3 articles of the Constitution establish the 3 branches of government. Article 1 is the legislative branch. It's not the executive. It's not the president. The president is not supposed to be the most important part of the federal government. People get confused about that. Article 1 is the legislative. Article 2 is the executive, and Article 3 is the judicial branch. All right. Well, in Article 1, Section 8, it lists or enumerates the powers that the federal government has. Okay. It doesn't say do whatever you want, do whatever people think is good, do whatever will make everybody happy. It doesn't say that. It actually lists out the powers that the federal government has. And those are basically things like coining money, declaring war, maintaining an army, maintaining a post office, regulating interstate commerce. That's about it. But obviously, it's gone way beyond that. Healthcare? I do not see healthcare, providing healthcare in Article 1, Section 8. But for some reason, it's been decided to do that we're supposed to do that healthcare is a right and the federal government's going to provide it. I don't find that in here. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is the 10th Amendment. All right, and this also gets ignored quite a bit, but it's still here, and the Amendment 10 has not been repealed. So I'm going to read it to you. Okay, remember, we just talked about the enumerated powers, which there are not very many of that the federal government has. Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So in other words, any powers that are not part of this enumerated list belong to the states or the people. And just for kicks, I wanted to read another one. The Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So what these amendments, along with Section 8 of Article 1, are basically saying is that the people maintain the most rights. All right, but then from there, the state government takes the next level of rights, and then at the very top, and our layer cake should actually look more like a pyramid, the very top federal government should be very small. All right, what this allows for is for people to say, I don't like my governor. Like right now, I have a douchebag governor. I don't like him at all. And my state just voted blue for the most part. So we're not really a purple state. I'm in Colorado, by the way. We're not so much a purple state anymore as we are blue. But when federalism is at work and every state is doing its own thing, guess what I can do? I can vote with my feet. I can move to another state and say, hey, I like the way they're running things up in Idaho, or I like the way they're running things over in South Dakota. Now the snow will keep me away from South Dakota. But I look at some other states I have been watching during COVID-19, and you can actually see federalism at work. Not been fabulous because a lot of these even so-called conservative governors are overreaching big time. But you can see the way different states are handling it. South Dakota, my favorite governor over there, Kristi Noem. I have a girl crush on her because she's basically letting people make their own choices for themselves, which is the way it's supposed to work, right? I see Idaho doing it right for the most part. Utah, not getting it right, surprisingly. But the people are really going after their governors. And the thing is, it's much, much easier to go after your governor than it is to go after your president. And your state senator and your state representative or your state assemblyman should be more important than your U.S. senator or your U.S. representative. What goes on at state government should be a lot more important than what goes on at the federal government because they are a lot more accessible. That is the entire point of federalism. We should not have to try to petition our government or president for an answer to a problem. We should be able to go knock on the door of our state senator or our state representative and say, hey, this is happening, or our county commissioners. I have been very involved in going to the commissioners, my county town hall, and I've been reaching out to county commissioners. And it actually has been making a difference during COVID because a lot of those decisions are local. Now, I don't like these decisions, but I can reach into local offices and local authorities to tell them I don't like it. I don't have to go to the president. Now that looks like we're going to have President Biden, and folks, just get ready because this is not over. Until inauguration, this thing is not over. And even then, what's probably going to happen is Trump is going to start his own news network and things are going to continue to be divided, okay, if not get worse. So we need to be able to go to a state that agrees with what our principles are. Anyway, what I was going to say was that with Biden has already threatened a national mask mandate. Biden wants to lock down the country. Now, obviously, that's not part of the enumerated powers, right? But over the last 100 years, we've seen the federal government reach way beyond the enumerated powers. So it would not shock me at all to see Biden find some way to try to enact that. All right. And so there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. And we can take anything he does to the Supreme Court, who's supposed to decide the constitutionality of his executive actions. But, and, another thing that he may do if he ends up with a majority in the House and Senate, oh, God forbid, he may get a law passed. So again, we have a federal government that's way too big. And I totally agree with what this lady said, and I wanted to throw a few more quotes at you. In Federalist number 45, James Madison wrote, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those who are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." All right, so she makes some of the same points that we do. And then I wanted to read this quote by Milton Friedman. "Government has three primary functions. It should provide for military defense of the nation. It should enforce contracts between individuals. It should protect citizens from crimes against themselves or their property. When government, in pursuit of good intentions, tries to rearrange the economy, legislate morality, or help special interests, the cost comes in inefficiency, lack of motivation, and loss of freedom. Government should be a referee, not an active player. Big government makes people fear one another and drives distrust." I think that was the end of his quote, sorry, at the end of player. "Big government makes people fear one another and drives distrust. In a free market economy, people have to provide goods or services that improve the lives of their fellow man in order to make a living. In a crony capitalist economy, people instead petition the government to stomp out their competitors, protect their interests, and improve their lives to the detriment of their fellow citizens. In a country with limited government, citizens would be free to practice their religions, customs, and culture as they wish. A federal election would not greatly impact you or your neighbor." Let me say this again. A federal election would not greatly impact you or your neighbor. So what we just had with the presidential election and the senators shouldn't have a big impact. The federal government would never enter the equation on most everyday issues in a person's life. But in a country where people use the federal government to force their customs, religions, and practices on others, a culture war is formed. Where Americans feel they have to fight and defeat those who are different than themselves just to preserve their way of life. That's what we're in right now. That's where we're at right now. We have two sides that think that they have to fight each other. Let me read this again. A culture war is formed where Americans feel that they have to fight and defeat those who are different than themselves just to preserve their way of life. We shouldn't have to. Going on with her quote, "This isn't sustainable. We're on a dangerous path, and Americans are right to fear violence, retaliation, or even another civil war of sorts if we don't change course. A return to federalism is the only realistic alternative and how we get out of this mess." All right, so I recommend this article. It's called "There's Only One Way to Stop Polarization from Tearing America Apart." So she reaches the conclusion that federalism is the way to get there. I agree. What she didn't say was, how do we get there? How do we have more federalism? Well, going back to the Constitution, and there's a quote, and I believe Mark Levin said this. If not, if you know who said it, email me or comment on AnnetteTalks.com or on Facebook. But there's a quote, use the Constitution to save the Constitution. So if you look past Articles 1, 2, and 3, and you skip over to Article 5, there's a little something there because the founders knew that we would have this situation at some point. And those of you that are like me, who belong to my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm sure many people of other faiths, believe that the Constitution was inspired by God, and that the founders were inspired, that the people that came together to write the Constitution, to vote on the Constitution, were inspired. Not a perfect document, but the best that they could do at that time, given their situation. But they knew that down the line, things would change and it would need to be amended. We see that we've already got, 28 amendments? And every single time, let me go back, okay? The point is that the founders knew we would have issues down the line and we need to make changes. So they gave us Article 5, which states the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. I'm going to stop right there. This is the way every amendment has been done so far. It started with Congress. But there's another option because Congress doesn't seem to be willing to give themselves term limits or to make themselves balance budgets or anything else. Congress is just not going to do it. That much is clear. So guess what? There's another way to do this. It hasn't been done before, but the founders put it in the Constitution. Or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. You know what that means? This is super exciting. This means that Article 5 allows specifically for 2/3 of the states to call for a convention for proposing amendments that is only become parts of the Constitution when ratified by 3/4 of the several states. It would be a limited purpose convention. People get afraid of like a runaway. People don't want that. I want a runaway convention. It's going to be a runaway convention. We don't want that. No, because it's 38 states or 3/4 of the states must agree on ratification. All right. So what I'm saying here, people, this is super exciting. And before you just decide to dismiss this or say no, thank you, I want you to ponder this, pray about it, and research it. Because this idea of a convention of states has been around for a long time. I became aware of it in, I think, 2013 or 2014. And when I first heard it talked about, the Spirit told me, yes, this is what we need, on more than one occasion. And, then life got in the way. I got divorced 5.5 years ago, had to restart my life. Life went on. Things were okay, I didn't give it a whole lot more thought. Other than I'm glad it's being worked on, sounds great, but I kind of let it drop. And then recently, with what's been happening, I've realized that federalism was the answer, but this is the mechanism. So before you decide to dismiss this out of hand, do your research, ponder and pray. All right, see, now I'm getting teary-eyed. I hate that. All right, so there have been many calls for a convention to amend the Constitution, but they've always been for one amendment, usually a balanced budget amendment or a term limit amendment. But it's never gotten far. So what we're looking at now is, and what's been started in 2013 by this group, the Convention of States, it's by the Citizens for Self-Governance. Doesn't that sound lovely? Self-governance. They started this movement called Convention of States. And if you go to conventionofstates.com, everything is there. But this movement's been going on since 2013. And Mark Levin wrote a book called The Liberty Amendments back in 2013. And I forgot about that until recently as well. But he wrote this book called The Liberty Amendments, Restoring the American Republic. And he wrote amendments because Mark Levin is a big, big believer in the Article 5 Convention or the Convention of States. And his book makes the argument for it and lists out the amendments that he wants. Because instead of going after one amendment, what you need is a limited convention that goes, a limited purpose convention that goes after one purpose but several amendments. And with this, you get enough states on board. But the Convention of States, okay, this is what their resolution says. Our resolution invokes Article 5 of the Constitution, calling for a Convention of States to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the jurisdiction of the federal government, and impose term limits on federal officials. So the convention is only called for that limited focus, limiting the federal government. And that way we don't end up with a bunch of kooky amendments put in there. Like a lot of people worry about the Second Amendment and losing it. This will not touch the Second Amendment. This will not touch the First Amendment. This will limit the federal government. That's all this convention is being called for. So the way it works is, and I'm opening the booklet here from the Convention of States. The way it works is you get 34 states to call for the convention. And I looked it up. They have 15 states who have already submitted their paperwork to call for a convention. All right, so you call a convention, then you have those 34 states submit their ideas for amendments, and then you need 38 states to agree on which amendments to ratify. So this is not going to be a runaway convention because, first of all, you need 34 to agree on this limited purpose convention, limited only, and because every state that agrees to this is agreeing on this. They are all signing the same resolution. They are all submitting the same paperwork. And actually, if you go to the back of this, you can see the application for a convention of states that each state is using. They're using this exact verbiage or very close verbiage, but they're all saying that the legislature of the state of, and Colorado is not one of those states yet. So you can see what my new hobby is going to be. Hereby applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States for the calling of a convention of the states limited to proposing amendments to the United States Constitution that impose physical restraint on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. And that's it. No other proposed amendments will go in there. So you get the 34 states to meet together, have a convention, and agree on the amendments that they are opposing for ratification. And let me just tell you some of the amendments that Mark Levin proposes in his book. And by the way, if you haven't gotten that book or read it, I highly recommend it, The Liberty Amendments by Mark Levin. Here are some of his proposals. He proposes 11, and this was done in 2013. I tacked on a few more. Establish 12-year term limits for members of Congress and the Supreme Court. I thought that was interesting. Repeal the 17th Amendment. And the 17th Amendment is what gave the power to the people to elect U.S. senators, took it away from the state Senate. So he wants the state senates to go back to appointing senators. Allow either Congress or the states to overturn a Supreme Court decision within 24 months with a 3/5 vote of the members of both houses or the states. So that's another check on the Supreme Court. Require a federal budget to be enacted by May or impose an automatic across-the-board 5% cut, and the budget may not exceed total tax receipts or 17.5% of GDP. So balanced budget amendment. Place a 15% limit on the amount of income taxes collected from natural and legal persons. Change the tax return filing date to the day before federal elections and ban federal estate, value added, or sales taxes. So we have a limit on income taxes and on other kinds of taxes. I love that. Require every federal agency to be reauthorized every 3 years in a standalone bill or else expire, and require a 7-member House committee to approve all regulations with an economic burden greater than $100 million within 6 months or cancel the implementation of the regulation. In other words, highly limiting bureaucracies, putting a sunset on them every 3 years, and then making the House approve the regulations that have economic impact. I love that. Limit the Commerce Clause to preventing states from impeding commerce and trade between the states, and specify that it does not extend to activity within the states, whether or not it affects interstate commerce, or to compelling an individual to participate in commerce. In other words, this is rolling back the Commerce Clause to what it originally meant by our founders, and not to what it meant from Supreme Court rulings like Wickard v. Filburn. So that's huge as well. Anyone that knows anything about the federal government, one of the reasons it's gotten so huge is because of the interpretation of the Commerce Clause. Extend the protection against seizure of private property to require compensation for regulations that reduce market value or interfere with the use of property in an amount exceeding $10,000. In other words, more power to you to keep your property and not have it seized by the government. Change Article 5 so that any constitutional amendment proposed by anyone will be adopted if it is ratified by 2/3 of the states, so allowing the states to be able to ratify amendments more easily. Require a 30-day waiting period between agreement upon the final version of any congressional bill and the final vote to approve it. And allow, so in other words, you can't just pass a bill, propose it quickly, look through it, give it a few days, and then pass it. And allow 3/5 of the states to override any federal statute or any federal regulation with a cost exceeding $100 million within 24 months of passage or approval. So that's another one, another check on the federal legislature by the states. You guys are going to love this one after this election. Require valid photo ID and proof of citizenship to register and vote in all federal elections in person or by mail, and limit early voting for 30 to 30 days before the election, except for active duty military personnel. I love that one too. And then I added a few, which I think probably Mark Levin would agree to, since this was written well before now. Limiting the number of justices in the Supreme Court to 9, and making members of Congress live by their own laws. Don't give any exceptions to laws that they pass. And, you know, I would also be okay with cutting off salary to congressmen who have retired, who have not been reelected or been termed out. Do you know they keep getting a salary? They should get nada after they leave office. Oh, and another biggie that I think would be awesome, and I saw this at a convention of states meeting at one point, and I love this idea. I think all congressmen, that's senators and U.S. representatives, should have to live full-time in their districts and only meet virtually as a group to caucus and to vote. That means that if a lobbyist wants to meet with them, they have to come to their district to meet with them. And they are there all the time. So if I want to come and knock on their door, I don't have to fly out to DC. So that would be another amendment I would add. So you can see that all of these amendments would limit the power of federal government. Maybe you don't agree with them all, and maybe states won't agree with them all. Even if we only got 2 or 3 of these passed, ratified, it would make a huge difference in the power of the federal government. And once that happens, guess what? Voting with your feet, red state, blue state, okay? Because then it would really make a huge difference of where you live. Whereas now it makes a difference, but not nearly as big as it would. And so we don't have to battle each other. We don't have to have culture wars. We don't have to fight each other to live up to our principles and to honor our culture. We can go and live in a state where our people live, where our tribe is at. And, you know, maybe I might decide that Arizona didn't really vote for Biden. And I might go there, or I might think Texas is my place, or I might decide on Idaho, except probably not because of the snow. But you get the point. So this is what we need, people. Again, let's use the Constitution to save the Constitution. And for those of you who are members of the church, you know that we have been told that when this will be hanging by a thread. I say it is hanging by a thread. I say 2020 is the year that it officially hangs by a thread. and that we would be the ones to save it. Well, if not us, who? And if not when, if not now, when? I believe that we are the ones to save this. And not just us, but we're going to join together with like-minded people everywhere who want to live the way they see fit. And I believe this is the way. Yes, I saw Mandalorian last night. I want you to ponder this, and I want you to think about it. And then when you realize, as I do, that this is the way, I want you to go to conventionofstates.com, read the material, look and see if your state is one of those states that has already submitted their petition. Mine is. Mine is not. Utah is. But even if your state already has submitted the petition, we live in an age where you can reach people in other states very easily. Social media, email, phone calls, snail mail. We can influence other people. We can reach out and influence other people. Go to conventionofstates.com. Read the material. Prager University has a little video I'll share on my Facebook page that talks about the Convention of States. Many, many people are on board with this. You should be too. Go, research, find out what it is that you can do, and then do it. Pray about it, ponder it, ask Heavenly Father, what should I be doing? Is this it? Is this the way? Sorry, I got to stop doing that. I believe it is. Join me in promoting an Article 5 Convention of States. Let's bring the power back to the states where they belong. This is doable. It took 7 years to get 15 states on board. I don't think it's going to take another 7 years to get to the 34. I think enough people are now awake to the situation we're in, and they know that this is not going to be easy. There is no easy solution, but we don't want a civil war. I think if we reach out and use our influence on those around us, we'll get there very quickly. I'm asking you, I am begging you to join me in this. Thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather. You can find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, lots of other places.